Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another video, where before we cover all of the Leman Russes, I figured I would do a ranking video. This is just something I sort of enjoy doing. It helps me formulate my thoughts a little bit, as well as give a quick rundown, and it's sort of a prelude to the video series I'm going to do, an eventual compilation series I'm going to do on the Leman Russes, and also the Bane Blades. So we're going to rank all the Leman Russes on a tier list. Pretty standard, I'm sure you've all seen this before. And there's nothing much to it. So let's get into it. So first up, we have the Vanquisher. So Vanquisher is the sort of saying dedicated anti-tank is a little silly. Most of these guys have some sort of anti-tank capabilities, but this is the giant anti-tank cannon. It's strength 18, damage d6 plus 6. Basically, if you fail a save against this thing, it's really going to hurt. It does really benefit from any buffs it can take, especially +1 to hit because it's on 4s. All of these tanks do. And its ability, it is not too bad. It's obviously a big help against its intended targets. It will almost always wound whatever it shoots at, though the saving is the problem as well as the hitting. So it definitely could be worth, keeping that in mind. However, the Vanquisher is the cheapest Leman Russ, so it is very tough for the cost. I'd say it's tougher than any of the Space Marine battle tanks by a wide margin, and is, in general, I'd say fairly middle of the road. If you want a cheap unit that can really deal some good armor damage, though it's very swingy whether or not it does, this is about as good as it gets, right? Because this guy, giant cannon, I'm going to put him in B tier. I think he's very middle of the pack in terms of extreme damage. I could bump him up to A tier, and we might by the end of the video, we'll see. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Eradicator. So the Eradicator is equipped with a Nova Cannon, which is, strength 7, AP 1, damage 2, and it gets to shoot in melee with no penalty. Special rule is fairly mediocre, and its big gun is really bad. The Nova Cannon is very, very mediocre against just about anything that isn't like it can kill Space Marines and below pretty well, but most of the battle tanks can do that a lot better and have more flexibility. So again, Eradicator is easily, in my opinion, the worst of the Leman Russes. I just want to cover this real quick. I'm evaluating most of these with las cannon and multi-sponsons, but we will cover that when we get to it. For there's one tank where it's just, I'll voice my opinions on it, but that's, the standard thing. I don't think these guys are worth bringing a Tech Priest for, though, of course, tank commanders, stuff like that. Standard buffs, giving it +1 to hit, make it move faster, whatever it may be. These all also benefit, of course, from the extra AP, which the Eradicator actually benefits from a lot. However, I'd say there's other tanks that do that much better. And speaking of doing that much better, we have what I would say is a better version of the Eradicator in the... the Exterminator is actually the autocannon tank, which is, yes, better than the Eradicator. One of the best Leman Russ variants. The Exterminator gives you +1 AP on one target, which is huge. Once you finish shooting with its big main gun, which is standard autocannon, strength 9, AP 1, damage 3, twin-linked, 4 attacks, rapid fire 4, 48-inch range. It's a very solid gun for mowing down infantry and even light vehicles. And its special rule, I'd say, is probably the best of any of the Leman Russes. And for that, I'm going to put the Exterminator in S tier. The Exterminator, very, very good. I'm a big fan of it. I think it looks cool. I'm a big autocannon fan personally, so I'm very partial to the Exterminator, and it's a great buffing piece. In terms of cost, it's a little on the pricier side, though it's not quite as expensive as the Demolisher, if I'm not mistaken. Next up, we have the Leman Russ Executioner, and this is the one I was talking about. The Executioner, if you don't bring the Plasma Sponsons, you're wrong, because that's how you build the Executioner. It shouldn't even have the other options. Just give it the Plasma Sponsons. Regardless, the Executioner's special rule is pretty weak. Below half strength, you get +1 to hit, which is easy enough to access via tank commanders or Lord Solar, and that's really the only negative I can say about the Executioner. Its gun is very, very solid. It's very, very strong, as you'd expect from a plasma gun. Unovercharged, it has d6 plus 3 attack, strength 7, AP 2, and damage 2, which means you don't need to overcharge against every target, though you should, because obviously overcharging is fun. It could definitely take a lot of damage from Hazardous, but hey, that's 40k, isn't it? Your tank is equipped with a weapon that can blow itself up. It doesn't get better than that. The Executioner, though, in my opinion, I think does what the Eradicator does significantly better. The Executioner, very solid. If you need anti-infantry, I think this is probably the one to go with. The blast is super useful against hordes, and it can still, it's not completely helpless against vehicles because, it has a good amount of shots. Though obviously that's not necessarily a strong suit. I'm going to say the Executioner's probably going to end up somewhere either at the top of B or the bottom of A. For now, I'm going to put it in A tier. I think it's, it's solid, right? It's Jack of all trades, master of none tank. Its special rule holds it back. Actually, I am going to put it in B. I think its special rule holds it back from being really good because its special rule isn't very good. Next up, we have the Punisher, which is the Gatling cannon. Leman Russ. Now, the Punisher isn't as bad as the Eradicator, I'll give it that. The Devastating Wounds rule is useful for when it's shooting at Terminators, and its main gun isn't too bad. It's 20 shots, strength 6, AP 0, damage 1. So it is good at clearing hordes, but the main problem with the Punisher, I think it would be better in almost any other army, is that since all of these vehicles have, combi bolters, hull-mounted heavy bolters or flamers, almost every guard vehicle has some sort of ancillary weapon like that. And that's what really holds the Punisher back, is it doesn't really have a place, but compared to the Eradicator, which really doesn't have a place and is also very mediocre, I think the Punisher has its place. If hordes become ever ultra-prevalent, there's no tank better for dealing with them, right? So I'm going to put the Punisher in C tier. It's just, it's not very, very interesting. Next up, we have the Demolisher. So the Demolisher is the most expensive Leman Russ at 200 points, so it is really pricey. Like, you're getting to Land Raider prices at that point. And the Demolisher has the best battle cannon, obviously. The Demolisher gun is 24-inch range, strength 14, AP 3, and damage D6. So rather swingy in terms of damage. However, it being strength 14, it's really general purpose. It's got blast. It's really just going to tear through a lot of infantry. It's going to tear through infantry. It's going to tear through vehicles. It does have the downside of being close range, but with the multi-meltas, these things want to be up close anyways. And the Demolisher has its shoot into close combat rule. Which is, of course, generally pretty useful because it's harder to tie this thing up. But obviously, it still doesn't want to be in melee. The Demolisher is really hard to go wrong with. It's definitely one of the best Leman Russ variants, but the Demolisher Leman Russ battle tank is mainly held back in that you can pay a little extra for a Leman Russ tank commander and bring a Demolisher on him, in which case this tank doesn't have much use, as you obviously get an order from that can buff your other tanks. So for that, it holds it back from being S tier. It would be, but since the tank commander exists, there's not that much reason to just bring a standard Demolisher. Even though, it's not a wrong choice to bring the Demolisher, but I just think, the tank commander is just a better option. And here we have the bog standard classic Leman Russ battle tank. So the Leman Russ battle tank is, unsurprisingly, the most generalist of them all. It doesn't really lean into anything too exceptional. Rerolling ones to hit is useful, and rerolling full hits against anyone on an objective you don't control is also very useful. But its main battle cannon is strength 10, AP 1, and damage 3, which is good. It takes buffs really well, I'll give it that, right? Pairing this with an Executioner, or an Exterminator, sorry, is definitely very solid for the extra AP, or overlapping fields of fire, to give, again, extra AP. And overall, I think the battle tank is, it's pretty solid. It's not as swingy as the Vanquisher, it's not as punchy as the Demolisher, but it's somewhere in between, and it's also, good but cheaper than the Demolisher. I'm going to put the battle tank probably... Yeah, I'm going to put the battle tank just beside the Demolisher. I think those two could flip. They could flip around. Really, I'd say anything above C tier, I'd say is worth bringing. Outside of, Let me preface this. I think a lot of people get caught up in the competitive side of 40k because that's the main thing that content creators talk about. I'm guilty of that. But remember, just because something isn't competitive doesn't mean you can't make it work in casual games, right? Most of us are casual players. That's just the long and the short of it. But in terms of competitive, I think anything from S to B has its place in a list. If you just need cheap armor, Vanquishers can't be beat, really. Honestly, the Vanquisher would be good even if it didn't have its main battle cannon, just because of how tough it is, how cheap it is, and its suite of weapons. But the Vanquisher cannon, it's... Honestly, the threat of it is probably more effective than the cannon itself, because any medium vehicle, or any vehicle really, has to fear. Like, if it toes out just the wrong way, this thing can snipe it and just instantly destroy almost any medium battle tank. But again, that's the main benefit of that. It's very cheap. Executioner, pretty general purpose. Special rules very bad, but the plasma cannon should not be slept on. Very solid for taking out enemy infantry and light vehicles, and in general will do a bit of damage to just about anything it shoots at, which is similar to the battle cannon, though the battle cannon trades off with the executioner because the battle cannon has the higher strength. You know, it's a small trade-off, and I'd say its special rule is a lot better. Re-rolling hits is super useful for the guard, especially if this thing can't get bust from a tank commander. Then we have the Demolisher, who is really, really good, but is just outclassed by tank commanders for, what is it, only 10 points more, something like that. And then we have at the top the Exterminator, which is a buffing piece mainly. Not that its damage is bad, the autocannon actually is a very solid weapon, but the main thing is giving that extra AP, which can turn just about anything into a threat. You know, it gives all your guardsmen's AP1, it gives something like a Bane Blade AP1. It's really useful. And then down at the bottom, Punisher is a fine tank, but it doesn't have a place in guard because they already have so much anti-horde. And the Eradicator is just a bad tank the whole way around. The Nova Cannon's weak, Special Rules weak. The Eradicator just really isn't good. I'm not a big fan of it, which is a shame. I do like the look of the Eradicator's Nova Cannon, but it really, it just doesn't really do anything exceptional, and it's not generalist in the slightest. So that about wraps up our quick look at my thoughts on the Leman Russ tanks. I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.